Phoenix. Before sunrise, the kind of dark that doesn't feel like night anymore. It feels like the world holding its breath. Inside Terminal B, a man sits alone near Gate B14, legs stretched out, coffee going cold beside him. He's reading a text message. Not a new one, an old one. The kind you return to when you need to remember who you are. He reads it, locks the phones, looks up. Around him, the terminal begins to wake, carts rolling, lights brightening. The slow machinery of departure assembling itself. He boards without hurry, walks into first class, finds his seat. Someone is already in it, a woman, silver hair, cream blazer. Settled the way people settle when they have never once considered that a chair might belong to someone else. She looks up at him. Her mouth tightens before he says a single word. And something in that cabin, something quiet, something old, begins to shift. The terminal was almost quiet. Phoenix Sky Harbor at 5 in the morning had that stillness between the last flight out and the first flight in. Cleaning crews pushing carts with wheels that squeaked on polished floors. A lone TSA agent scrolling his phone at an empty checkpoint. The smell of burnt coffee drifting from a kiosk that hadn't officially opened yet but had started the machine anyway because some habits don't wait for business hours. Warren Kendrick sat in a black chair near Gate B14, legs stretched out, jacket folded across his lap, a cup of coffee on the seat beside him that he hadn't touched in 20 minutes. He was reading a text message, not a new one, an old one. The kind you go back to when you need to remember something important. Not because you've forgotten it, because carrying it in your head isn't the same as seeing it written down in someone else's handwriting. Even if that handwriting was just a phone keyboard. Even if the person who typed it was gone. The name at the top of the thread said Dad. The last message in the chain was dated 3 years, 2 months, and 11 days ago. Warren knew the number without checking. Some you just carry in the body, not the mind. Like the way you remember a scar not by thinking about it, but by touching it. The message read, Son, don't ever make yourself smaller so other people can feel more comfortable. That's not kindness, that's surrender. Love, Dad. Kendrick had sent that text from a hospital bed in Memphis, oxygen tube under his nose, hands that had gripped a steering wheel for 40 years, finally still against the white sheet. He'd driven a city bus his entire adult life. Route 22, Memphis to Midtown, every single morning. Rain and ice and summer heat, so thick it shimmered off the asphalt like something alive and angry. He never complained about the route. He complained about the people who thought the route didn't matter. About dispatchers who scheduled drivers without asking, about pension adjustments that were supposed to be temporary and weren't, about potholes on Union Avenue that the city fixed on the north side and left alone on his side, but he drove every morning, exactly on time. With the kind of quiet that didn't ask permission from anyone, Warren locked his phone, slid it into his jacket pocket, picked up the coffee, still warm, just barely. He had a flight to catch, Dallas by noon. And a 14-year-old named Simone who had texted him in capital letters, which in her communication style meant a level of seriousness that other people reserved for legal documents. Lat Dad. Not like the recital, not like the science fair. This time you actually show up on time. He had responded with a thumbs up emoji. She had responded with 3 question marks, which was fair. He was still thinking about those 3 question marks when the woman sitting 2 chairs down plugged her phone charger and accidentally knocked her coffee toward the floor. Warren caught it without thinking, without looking up, almost. Just the hand going out and the cup being there and the hand coming back. He handed it to her. She blinked at him, startled, then looked at his boarding pass on the seat beside him. First class, seat 2A, then at his jeans, his plain dark jacket, the absence of a watch that announced anything. Thank you, she said. Of course, he said. She kept looking. For one more second, the way people do when something doesn't match the category they've already filed you into. He noticed. He always noticed. He had spent 43 years noticing. It had started to feel less like a wound and more like a weather report. Just information. Just the temperature of a room before you walk into it. He didn't say anything. He picked up his coffee, took the first sip of it. Cold now, he drank it anyway. The gate agent arrived at the desk at 6 o'clock. Started the boarding process 12 minutes later. The overhead speaker crackled with the familiar script. Pre-boarding passengers needing extra time or traveling with small children. Warren watched 3 families go. A grandmother with a collapsible stroller that refused to collapse. Working at the release mechanism with the calm focus of someone who had been wrestling with this specific stroller for 2 years and had developed a strategy. A man with a cast on his left arm trying to figure out the geometry of a carry-on bag that was suddenly for the first time a two-handed operation. And a little boy, maybe 5, standing at the entrance to the jet bridge like it was the edge of something unknown. Warren crouched down. Eye level? First time on a plane? The boy nodded, huge eyes. The kind of eyes children have when they're genuinely uncertain whether something's exciting or terrifying and haven't decided yet. It's going to be loud for about 10 seconds when we take off, Warren said. Then it gets smooth, like floating. The boy thought about this. Like swimming? Exactly. Like swimming, just without the water. Something settled in the boy's face. The uncertainty tipped toward the exciting side. He walked into the jet bridge with his shoulders back, like a person who has received relevant information and has decided to proceed with confidence. His mother looked back at Warren. Mal, thank you. Warren nodded, stood, picked up his carry-on. He had flown this route 14 times in the last year. Phoenix to Dallas, direct first class, seat 2A every single time. Window seat, left side. Good morning light. He liked the quiet of being above the clouds. The way the city fell away and the ordinary friction of the world below didn't follow you up. He walked down the jet bridge. The cabin attendant near the door smiled the practiced smile. Bright and automatic as a motion sensor, Warren stepped into first class and stopped. Seat 2A, there was a woman in it, mid-60s, cream blazer, clean and expensive. Silver hair arranged with the precision of someone who had not done it herself, or had done it so many times the precision had become automatic. A handbag on the seats beside her, leather dark tan, a small gold clasp, resting there the way objects rest when they've been placed with intention. Not set down, position she wasn't reading, wasn't looking at her phone, wasn't doing anything that required the window seat particularly. She was simply sitting in it, the way certain people sit certain chairs, with the ease of someone who has never once considered that a chair might belong to someone else. Warren checked his boarding pass. Out of habit, not necessitous, seat 2 of Phoenix to Dallas, first class, his name, his ticket, his seat. He looked back at the woman. She had been watching him since he walked in, not turning her head, just watching. The way her eyes moved was its own kind of communication, slow, starting from his shoes. Moving up, arriving at his face with a conclusion already written, her mouth tightened before he said a word. Warren knew that particular tightening. He had a catalog of it built over 4 decades, in bank lobbies where the tellers found other things to look at, in hotel check-in lines where the question about his reservation carried a different emphasis than it carried for the person ahead of him, in conference rooms with glass walls where his proposals were heard and then attributed in the follow-up meeting to someone else's thinking. He took a breath. Even. Excuse me, ma'am, he said. I believe that's my seat. She looked at him the way someone looks at a vending machine that has delivered the wrong item. Incorrectable. Not deserving of full attention. No, she said. This is my seat. Not I think there might be a misunderstanding. Not let me check my boarding pass. Not the softening that people use when they know they're wrong and need it to find the exit gracefully. Just, no, Warren held up his boarding pass. Level. Steady. Seat 2A, he said. Phoenix to Dallas. She didn't look at the pass. She looked at him, like the paper was beside the point. Like reality was whatever she had decided it was, when she sat down and arranged her handbag on the adjacent seat. I always sit here, she said. On this route. This is my seat, behind Warren. Boarding continued. A roller bag wheels squeaked on the jet bridge. A child asked a loud question about clouds. The cabin filled with the ordinary noise of the world arriving and arranging itself. Zane was here, he was asked, because that was the thing to do. You stood there with your valid ticket, and you waited for the world to catch up to the facts. Her name, he would learn, was Dorothy Langford. She was 67 years old. She had flown this route, Phoenix to Dallas, direct first class every month for 11 years. Business at first, then more business, then the kind of habit that becomes part of who you are, the way a route can. Her husband, Gerald, had always booked the tickets. He was good at that, at the logistics of a shared life. He knew her preferences without being reminded. Window seat, left side, row 2, not row 1, because the divider in row 1 made her feel closed in. Seat 2A. Gerald had been dead for 8 months. Dorothy had booked this flight herself for the first time in 11 years. And she had got seat wrong. She had been assigned 3C, a Zale seat, right side, foreign to her. Wrong in a way she couldn't fully explain to anyone. So when she boarded early and found 2A empty, she sat down. She didn't think it through. She sits because the seat felt like Gerald, because the window and the angle of the morning light and the particular distance from the galley were all things he had arranged for her without asking. And if she sat here long enough, with the pink phoenix sky outside and her hands folded in her lap, she could almost make the last 8 months feel like something she had imagined. She was still trying when Warren Kendrick walked into the aisle. None of this excused what came next, but it explains what was underneath it. The grief that had hardened into something that looked, from the outside, like certainty, like entitlement, like a woman who had decided the rules didn't apply to her. Sometimes the most entitled behavior in the world is just lost wearing expensive clothing. Megan Hartwell arrived in the aisle like someone who had already run the numbers on this situation and didn't like any of the answers. She was 33, 5 years with Meridian Air, good at her job in the ways that showed up in evaluations. Safety protocols memorized, passenger names remembered, coffee preferences noted. Less good at the part that never appeared in any evaluation. The part where you had to decide, quickly and without documentation, who mattered more. She glanced at Warren's boarding pass. 2A. Clear as anything. She glanced at Dorothy's phone when Dorothy produced it without being asked. Already anticipating the request. Already moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this before, who had been right before, who expected the same outcome this time. 3C. Megan looked at the screen. Let the number settle. Then she looked at Dorothy's blazer, the gold clasp on the handbag. The particular quality of Dorothy's stillness. The stillness of someone who had spent decades in rooms where things went her way and had learned to wait with the confidence of a person who already knew the ending. And then Megan thought about Amber. Amber had been on this route for 6 years. 4 months ago, Amber had asked Dorothy Langford to please lower her voice during beverage service because a young child 2 rows back had finally fallen asleep, a reasonable request. Made quietly, Dorothy had filed a formal complaint within 2 hours of landing. 9 paragraphs, names, times, the exact words Amber had used, the exact tone. The kind of email that only gets written by someone who has written many of them before and knows exactly which phrases make supervisors react. Amber was now on the Atlanta shuttle. Short haul. Early mornings and late nights. It wasn't technically a demotion, but everyone who worked that route knew what it meant to be sent there, Megan. So, Megan did what people do when they know the right thing and cannot find a way to afford it. She called for Derek. Derek Ormond had been senior cabin manager for 9 years, 46 years old, salt and pepper hair kept close. A posture that said, I have managed worse than this, even during the times when he hadn't. He carried his tablet like a credential, the way some men carry business cards. He came into the aisle with the unhurried authority of a person who expects to be the final word. Megan gave him a look as he passed her. Small. The kind of look that said, I'm sorry, I didn't know what else to do. Derek didn't acknowledge it. He was already assessing. Woman in 2A, man in the aisle with a boarding pass visible in his hand. Phones beginning to rise in rows 3 and 4. Slowly, the way phones rise when people are trying to look like they're checking messages and are actually documenting a situation. What seems to be the issue? Derek asked. Warren kept his voice level. Factual. The way you speak when you want the words to hold up later. My boarding pass is for seat 2A. I've shown it. This passenger is seated there and has declined to move. Dorothy kept her eyes on the window. Like the conversation was weather. Something happening outside her. He's exaggerating, she said to the glass. I explained that I sit here every month. It's a simple misunderstanding. Derek turned to her. May I see your boarding pass, ma'am? Dorothy produced her phone, slowly. With the air of someone granting a request they find slightly beneath them, Derek looked at the screen 3C. His jaw moved, just slightly. A small mechanical adjustment. The kind your face makes when your mind has received information it was not hoping for. Megan watched him. She saw the exact moment he understood the clean simplicity of the situation. 2 passengers, 2 boarding passes, one right, one wrong. Nothing ambiguous, nothing requiring interpretation. She watched him understand it completely, and then she watched him look at Dorothy's blazer, at the bracelet on her wrist, at the practiced patience of a woman who had spent decades getting what she wanted by waiting for others to provide it, and she watched something shift in his eyes. Not cruelty. Something smaller and more ordinary than cruelty. Calculation. Mr. Kendrick, Derek said carefully, in the interest of keeping our departure on schedule, I'd like to offer you seat 3C. It's still first class. I can authorize additional miles and a meal credit for the inconvenience. The cabin heard it. Warren looked at Derek for a moment. Whose comfort? Warren said. Are we protecting exactly? Derek blinked. He did not answer. Because there was no answer that didn't make the choice visible. 3 rows back, Helen Bradshaw set her paperback down on her knee. She was 71 years old. Retired school teacher, 36 years in Flagstaff. 36 years of reading children's faces for the specific signals of people who know they're wrong and are waiting to see if anyone will say so. The fractional hesitation before the answer. The eyes that shift right. The sudden performance of offense as a substitute for accuracy. She had seen it 10,000 times. She was seeing it now, in an adult, in an aisle. She picked up her phone, set it on her lap without a screen on, left it there, just in case. James Whitfield. 2 seats back and across the aisle, was already holding his up. He was 68, 25 years of military service, retired. His hands were stiff in the mornings from the arthritis. Cold air made it worse, and the cabin was cold. But they were steady enough when it mattered. He had spent a career learning the difference between authority and wisdom. Authority announced itself first and loudest. Authority reached for official language when cornered. Authority reframed situations until the original truth was so deep under procedure that you'd need an excavation to find it. Wisdom watched and documented. James pressed record. Without looking at the screen, Nina Prescott was 39, a nurse from Tempe. She was flying to Dallas to meet her first grandchild, born 6 days ago. She had a gift wrapped in yellow paper balanced on her lap and had been holding it since the gate because she didn't want to put it in the overhead bin. It felt wrong to put it in the overhead bin. She had spent 16 years in emergency medicine. She was trained to read bodies for information their owners hadn't meant to give. Warren Kendrick's shoulders were not raised. His hands were open, not clenched. His breathing was slow in the way that slow breathing only is when it's controlled, when it's the result of practice, of having stood in aisles like this one before, with papers like this one in hand, and having learned that the body's first instinct was not always the body's wisest choice. She knew that kind of stillness. It wasn't calm, it was discipline. The difference mattered enormously. Calm was an absence of tension. This was tension held in a fist so tight it looked like nothing at all. She lifted her phone and began recording, openly, without hiding it. Dorothy saw the phones going up. Something moved in her chest. Not guilt yet. Something earlier than guilt. The first cold awareness that the room was not reading this the way she had expected. She had expected the flight attendant to handle it quietly, the way things were usually handled. The man would be redirected with compensation. He would accept because accepting was easier than standing in an aisle, and most people, in her experience, chose easier when easier came with airline miles and an apology. She leaned toward Warren, lowered her voice just enough to make it feel private. Not enough to make it actually private, honey, she said. I've flown this route for 11 years. I know how these things work. They can put you somewhere else just as nice. Just let it go, somewhere. Else, Warren heard those 2 words and felt the full weight of them. Not as a surprise. It's as a confirmation somewhere else at 23. When the loan officer at the Memphis bank suggested he might be more comfortable speaking to someone in a different branch. Somewhere else at 32, when the hotel manager in Atlanta offered him a room on a lower floor that was, he was assured, just as nice. Somewhere else at 38, in a boardroom with a glass wall when the only empty chair at the table was somehow always, slightly outside the circle, take another seat. Take another officette. Take another door. He looked at Dorothy, direct, unhurried. I have a seat, he said. This one. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence. Not that the silence of an empty room, the silence of a full room in the process of deciding something. Helen Bradshaw felt it. She had felt it in classrooms. The held breath before the room chose who it was going to be. Derek cleared his throat. Another offer forming. Warren could see it. Another redirection wrapped in courtesy. Dorothy spoke first. She turned her face toward the window. Voice lifted just enough. Clear enough for the cabin to receive it. You people, she said, always have to make everything into a battle. The words dropped and stayed, like something physical had entered the cabin and taken up space. You people, Helen closed her eyes for half a second. She knew exactly what that phrase carried. She'd heard it in a teacher's lounge 22 years ago, directed at a parent she deeply respected. She'd heard it at town hall meetings and in parking lots and in conversations people conducted as though she weren't standing right there. 2 words. Doing decades of accumulated work in a single sentence. James Whitfield's jaw tightened. He kept recording. Nina Prescott's thumb was trembling slightly against her phone, but the phone itself did not move. The Dirk Ormond went very still. He was looking at his tablet with the intensity of someone searching for an exit that the tablet could not provide. Megan Hartwell stood at the edge of the galley, with her hand resting on the cart, not pushing it anywhere, not going anywhere, just standing there with her eyes on the floor. Warren looked at Dorothy. He didn't speak immediately. He let the words exist, let the cabin sit with them. Let everyone hear what had just been said and understand what it meant and decide, inside themselves, what kind of people they were going to be in response to it. Then he spoke. You saw me, he said, for less than 30 seconds. Dorothy finally looked at him directly. And somehow, he said, you decided who I was. No anger in it. No performance. No raised volume. No step forward. No gesture designed for an audience. Just the words. Set down with the precision of someone who has learned that precision is more powerful than volume. That a sentence with no excess in it is harder to argue with than a sentence built from feeling. Dorothy's mouth opened. She had started a sentence somewhere in her chest, and it wasn't arriving. Warren looked at her for one more moment. Then at Derek, then at Megan. His hand moved to his jacket, slowly. He touched his phone through the fabric, but didn't take it out, not yet. He was going to let this go a little further first. Because he had learned, from his father, from 2 decades building Kendrick Dynamics, from 3 people in a Memphis co-working space into something that its entire industries oriented themselves around, that the most important thing was not what you said when you were pressured. It was what you let other people say. Give them room. Give them silence. Give them the certainty that they're winning. And people showed you exactly who they were. Derek moved to the service phone near the galley, pressed the button, spoke quietly, professionally. The way trained people speak when they are converting a situation into a report, Captain Beckford. We have a situation in first class. Seat 2A. A passenger is declining to comply with crew direction. Declining to comply. Warren heard every word. He recognized the technique. Not because it was then unusual, because it was familiar. The reclassification. The moment an institution decides the facts have become inconvenient and begins constructing a different narrative from some materials. A seat dispute became a compliance issue. A man standing with a valid ticket became a passenger refusing crew direction. The woman in the wrong seat became invisible in the language. She wasn't even in the sentence. That was how it worked. Not through malice, always. Sometimes through the simple desire to reach a resolution that didn't require anyone with a gold clasp on their handbag to be inconvenienced. The language followed the path of least resistance and called it procedure. Warren took his off his phone. Not yet. He was going to wait for the captain. Because this wasn't finished. It was, in fact, barely begun. He straightened his jacket, shifted his carry-on to the other hand, looked at the back of Dorothy Langford's silver head as she faced the window and the pink phoenix morning. She was so completely certain that was the thing that struck him. Not the anger, not the performance, the certainty, the total, unexamined certainty that the room would arrange itself the way rooms had always arranged themselves for her, that the inconvenience would be redirected, that the man in the aisle would eventually go somewhere else. He almost felt something like pity. Almost. His phone buzzed once. He glanced at the screen without removing it from his pocket. A message from Denise Calloway. His cow. 9 years of working together, and she still answered faster than anyone else on his team. The woman who had been there when Kendrick Dynamics was a business plan on a folding table, and who was now managing a company that made airlines nervous when they saw her name in an email. Board packet ready. Meridian Air partnership call moved to 2 p.m. They're eager. Warren read it, locked the phone, put it back in his jacket. Outside gate B14, the Phoenix skies had shifted from pink to gold, the kind of morning light that made everything look like the beginning of something. Inside Flight 628, the boarding door was still open. The jet bridge was still attached. The ordinary world was still right there, connected to this one by a metal corridor. Warren Kendricks stood in the aisle with a valid boarding pass, and every camera in 4 rows pointed quietly in his direction. He had not raised his voice, had not touched anyone, had not threatened or performed or escalated, had asked for nothing except the seat he had already paid for. And somewhere at the front of the plane, footsteps were coming, measured, heavy, the particular weight of command, the captain. Warren breathed in, held it, let it go. Don't ever make yourself smaller so other people can feel more comfortable. Yes, Dad, he knew. Captain Howard Beckford filled a doorway the way certain men fill a room, not loud, not announcing himself. Just a present in the particular way that decades of command produces in a person. 4 gold stripes on his shoulders, silver at his temples, a face that had seen turbulence in 37 countries and learned to keep the same expression through all of it. Controlled, measured, the faces of a man who had decided early in his career that visible uncertainty was a liability he couldn't afford. He walked through first class and the ambient noise dropped, not from anything he said, just from the weight of him moving through the space. Warren watched him come, measured the pace, the posture, the way Beckford's eyes swept scene before he reached it, taking inventory the way pilots take inventory, looking for the thing most likely to require immediate management. His eyes landed on Dorothy first, 1 second, maybe less. But Warren caught it, and in that 1 second he understood exactly how this was going to go. Derek stepped forward before Beckford reached the row. Ready, a little too ready, the posture of a man who has been holding a problem and is relieved to hand it to someone with more authority. Passenger in 2A, declining to comply with crew direction, Captain. We've offered an alternate first-class seat with compensation. He's refused. Warren looked at Derek, steady. Said nothing. That was the version they were going with. Not, a passenger is occupying the wrong seat. Not, we've confirmed the assigned passenger has a valid ticket and the current occupant does not. Not any accurate accounting of what had actually occurred in this aisle over the last 10 minutes. Just declining to comply, Helen Bradshaw. 3 rows back, pressed her lips together. 36 years of teaching had given her a very precise instrument for detecting the moment when a summary of events became something other than a summary of events. When the words were technically defensible and completely dishonest. This was that moment. Dorothy sat by the window, handbag on the adjacent seat, eyes forward. The posture of someone who has already won and is waiting for the confirmation to be filed. Beckford turned to Warren.
Yes, sir.
I'm Captain Beckford. Can you explain what the situation is? Warren kept his voice even, each word placed with care. The way you speak when you understand the words are going somewhere beyond this conversation. My boarding pass is for seat 2A. The passenger currently in that seat a boarding pass for 3C. I asked her to move. Your flight attendant confirmed the assignments. Your cabin manager confirmed the assignments. Your cabin manager then asked me to take the seat she should be in. Beckford looked at Megan, a beat of silence. His pass is valid, Captain, Megan said. Her voice was steady, but something underneath it wasn't. Hers shows 3C, the truth again, out loud. For the second time in 10 minutes, the facts introduced themselves to the room and stood there, plain and undeniable, waiting to see what the room would do with them. Beckford looked at Dorothy. Dorothy had been waiting for this. She straightened slightly, drew a small breath, and said the word that changes the architecture of a room the moment it's spoken. He made me feel unsafe. 2 beats of complete silence. Unsafe, not inconvenienced, not uncomfortable, not simply incorrect about which seat was hers. Unsafe held Nina Prescott. Still holding her phone level, felt her stomach contract. 16 years of emergency medicine had taught her exactly what fear looked like in a body. The shallow, rapid breathing, the shoulders pulled inward, the eyes that couldn't fix on anything, the hands that moved without direction. Dorothy Langsford's eyes were perfectly still. Her shoulders were relaxed against the seat back. Her hands rested on her handbag, with the composed patience of someone waiting for a situation to resolve in her favor. Nina kept recording. James Whitfield leaned forward. That's not what happened. His voice was quiet. The specific quiet of a person who has spent decades learning that volume is what you use when authority is all you have, and understatement is what you use when you have something more. Beckford turned toward him. "Sir, please remain seated." James met the captain's eyes. One long look. The look of a man who has followed orders his entire professional life and developed through that experience a very precise sense of which orders deserved following. He sat back, but his phone stayed up, and his eyes stayed on Beckford. Beckford turned back to Warren. "Mr. Kendrick, can you describe your interaction with this passenger?" "Yes." Warren held up the boarding pass one more time. "I arrived at my assigned seat. Found it occupied. Showed my boarding pass. Asked the passenger to move. She declined. I requested a flight attendant. The flight attendant confirmed I was correct. The cabin manager confirmed I was correct. The cabin manager then asked me to move instead." He paused. "Let the structure of it stand without decoration. That is the complete sequence of events." Beckford absorbed this, looked at Derek. Derek found something important to examine on his tablet. 4 seconds of silence, which, in a pressurized cabin with 40 witnesses and recording devices, felt much longer. Then Beckford said, "In the interest of an on-time departure." Warren knew before the sentence finished. He had heard the opening of that sentence before, in different buildings, from different men in different kinds of authority. It was how institutions ended conversations that had become inconvenient, not by addressing the problem, by reclassifying the person who had the problem as the problem itself. "I'm going to ask you to accept the alternate seat, 3C. Still first class. Additional miles and a meal credit." Warren did not move. Dorothy did not move. Helen Bradshaw, 3 rows back, closed her eyes for 1 second. "No." Warren said it the way his father had taught him to say the things that mattered, without apology embedded in the inflection, without the slight upward curve at the end that turns a statement into a question, and a question into something that can be negotiated away. Just, "No." Beckford's expression shifted. Not dramatically, barely. "But the shift was there, sir. I paid for 2A. Warren's voice held exactly the same register, not louder, not softer, selected 2A. "I boarded with a valid ticket for 2A. I am not moving because someone else prefers the window." The cabin held its breath. Beckford's eyes moved briefly across rows 3 and 4. Quickly enough that most people wouldn't notice. Warren noticed the slight inventory of the phones, the calculation happening behind the practiced neutral expression. The phones changed things. Beckford knew it. Derek knew it. Megan knew it. Even Dorothy, who had been maintaining an elaborate indifference toward the cameras, had begun doing the specific kind of not looking that required awareness of exactly where every lens was pointed. Beckford stepped slightly closer to Warren, dropped his voice a register. The move of a man who wanted to make this feel like a private conversation, despite being in a room with 40 witnesses. "Mr. Kendrick, I understand you feel this situation is unfair, but I have a departure to manage and a cabin to maintain. I'm asking for your cooperation." Warren looked at him with the measured patience of a man who has heard words used incorrectly his entire life, and that to identify the exact word being misused. "My cooperation," Warren said. "With what exactly?" "With accepting the alternate seat. You've confirmed my seat is 2A. Yes, you've confirmed she's assigned to 3C. Yes, and you're asking me to cooperate with vacating my confirmed seat so she can remain in hers." Beckford didn't answer immediately. The absence of an answer was itself an answer. "I want the record to be clear," Warren said, "about what's being asked." James Whitfield exhaled through his nose, very slow. The way he exhaled when something confirmed what he had already known was going to happen. He had buried colleagues who were never believed, men who told the truth and were reclassified, who came forward and were reframed, who had nothing at the end except their own account of events, which institutions learned to question with great efficiency. He had understood early that the only protection against institutional amnesias was documentation that existed outside the institution. His hands hurt. He kept recording. Dorothy had stopped looking at the window. She was watching Beckford now, and something had shifted in her chest. Not guilt yet, not the full weight of what she had set in motion, but the first crack of awareness that the situation was not progressing the way situations had always progressed for her. The man in the aisle was not getting louder, not more agitated, not doing the things that people did when they felt themselves losing ground and could sense it coming. He was getting quieter, more precise, more specific with each exchange, which was wrong, which was not how this worked. She had been in enough boardrooms, enough negotiations, enough moments where the person with less social weight eventually found the easier path and took it. Because the easier path was always available. Because institutions offered it deliberately. Because most people eventually chose comfort over principle when comfort came with compensation and a smile, except Warren Kendrick was not taking the easier path. And the institution, in the form of Captain Howard Beckford, was beginning to look like it was running out of institutional options. Dorothy opened her mouth and made the second mistake of the morning. You know what your problem is? The cabin went still in a different way. Not the stillness of held breath waiting for resolution. The stillness of something about to break. Warren looked at her. Didn't respond. Didn't need to. The look itself was a question she had stepped into. Dorothy pressed forward. Her voice had taken on the edge of someone who has decided that advancing is safer than retreating. You people are always looking for something to be offended by. Complete silence. The kind that follows something said in public that cannot be unsaid in public. Helen Bradshaw pressed a flat hand against the seat back in front of her. Her eyes closed for 1 second. In 36 years, she had watched children say things in classrooms that the classroom absorbed and remembered for years afterward. She was watching it happen again, from a first-class seat on a Tuesday morning, from a woman in a cream blazer. Nina Prescott's thumb was trembling slightly against her phone case. The phone itself did not move, James Whitfield said, under his breath, quietly enough that only the people immediately around him heard it. Lord, Megan Hartwell stood at the galley entrance with her hand pressed over her mouth, not as a performance, as the instinctive physical response to witnessing something she could not stop and could not fix. Derek Ormond looked at his tablet. The screen was dark. He was looking at the reflection of the cabin in the black glass. Beckford's face went carefully, professionally neutral. The mask that airline veterans develop for situations that require the appearance of not having heard what was just said. Warren looked at Dorothy, not with anger, not with the performance of injury that would have given everyone in the cabin an excuse to reframe who was causing the problem. He looked at her with something older and quieter than anger. The specific disappointment of a person who has been shown something they already knew was there. Who had hoped, despite the evidence, that this time would be different. He let the silence exist for a full moment. Then, "You saw me for less than 30 seconds, Dorothy met his eyes. For the first time since he had walked into the aisle, she held his gaze. And you decided who I was. No accusation in it, no demand. Just the observation, precise and irrefutable, laid down in the aisle between them like something that would have to be stepped over. Dorothy's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Nothing came out. Warren reached into his jacket, slow, no theater in it. The deliberate movement of a man who has made a decision and is carrying it out in his own time, on his own terms. Beckford watched the motion. His posture shifted, a slight recalibration. The adjustment of a person who is suddenly uncertain what category of situation they are in, sir, Beckford said carefully. What are you doing, Warren? Looked at him. I'm going to make a call. I need you to. You've confirmed my boarding pass is valid. Warren's voice stayed at the same register, each word separated from the last by exactly enough space. You've confirmed her boarding pass is for a different seat. You've asked me to leave my seat anyway. And in the last several minutes, that passenger has made 2 public statements that multiple people in this cabin have documented. He looked at Beckford directly. I'm going to make a call. He took out his phone, scrolled to a name, tapped it. It connected on the first ring, which was not an accident. Denise Calloway had been Warren's chief operating officer for 9 years. She knew his voice in every register it had. She knew the difference between his frustrated voice and his tired voice and his thinking voice, and the particular quality calls calm took on when something had happened that was going to require the full weight of their legal and corporate teams before the day was out. This was that voice, Warren, crisp, already alert. I'm on the plane, he said. Isis Beckford. There's a situation, a half beat, just long enough to register the word. Tell me, I'm on Meridian Air Flight 628, Phoenix to Dallas, first class, seat 2A. Another passenger is seated in my assigned seat. The crew confirmed my boarding pass is valid. They confirmed her boarding pass is for seat 3C. They've asked me to surrender the seat. When I declined, the captain referenced removal. And the passenger has made 2 public statements in the last few minutes that have been recorded by multiple witnesses in this cabin. Silence on the line. The specific silence of someone assembling information very quickly. Then, "Are you safe?" Warren's eyes moved to Dorothy, who was sitting very still in 2A, looking at nothing in particular. "I have been told," he said, "that I am making someone else feels unsafe." Another half beat. "Shorter. Put me on speaker." Warren looked at Beckford, then at Dorothy, then at the phones in rows 3 and 4. He tapped the screen. The voice that came into the first-class cabin was not loud. It didn't need to be. It was the voice of a woman who had spent 9 years in rooms where she was underestimated, and had learned to use that underestimation as information who she was dealing with, who knew exactly how to be precise in a way that didn't give anyone anything to push against. This is Denise Calloway, Chief Operating Officer of Kendrick Dynamics. I need to know who the senior airline representative is on this aircraft. Derek looked at Beckford. Beckford looked at the phone. This is Captain Howard Beckford, Captain Beckford. Not a question, a repetition. The kind that means, I have your full name now, and it is in a document. I want to be clear that this call is being documented by our legal and corporate affairs teams in real time. Can you confirm that Mr. Warren Kendrick is the assigned passenger for Seat 2A on Flight 628 from Phoenix to Dallas? A pause. Yes. Can you confirm that the other passenger currently in Seat 2A has a boarding pass for Seat 3C? A shorter pause. Yes. Then I need someone on this aircraft to explain to me why Mr. Kendrick is being asked to move. Silence, 40 people in a pressurized cabin. Not one sound. Dorothy Langford had stopped moving on her handbag clasp. The gold clasp she had been clicking open and shut without realizing it for the last several minutes. It stopped. Derek was looking at the floor. Megan's was not moving. Beckford's jaw worked once, twice. Like the words he needed were forming somewhere they couldn't get out quickly enough. Denise waited. She was extraordinarily good at waiting. She had learned it in rooms where waiting was the thing that revealed what people were actually made of. "Miss Calloway," Beckford said finally, "aircraft operations are under my authority. No one is disputing your authority, Captain." Her voice did not change. Level as a frozen. "We are documenting your judgment." The word landed exactly as she intended. Judgment, not policy, not procedure, not protocol or regulation or operational necessity. Judgment, because that was what this had always been, not a question of rules. A question of who this captain believed when 2 boarding passes said different things. A question of who he asked to sacrifice when the resolution that required no confrontation meant one person lost what they had paid for. Judgment. And now that judgment had a record. Helen Bradshaw exhaled slowly. The way you breathe when you've been holding something in your chest and the pressure finally releases. Not relief, exactly. Something more complicated than relief. The feeling of watch something fair play out in real time, in front of you, close enough to touch, and knowing that the only thing you contributed was keeping your phone ready. She looked out the window at the Phoenix tarmac. The ground crews moving between aircraft with the purposeful indifference of people who had work to do and were doing it regardless of what's happening inside the plane at Gate B14. The ordinary world going about its ordinary business. She thought about a parent named Carolyn Reese. 22 years ago, a parent-teacher conference in Flagstaff at the school where Helen had been teaching for 14 years at that point. Carolyn Reese was a woman Helen respected deeply, organized, engaged, the kind of parent who showed up and paid attention and asked the questions that other parents were afraid to ask. The vice principal had spoken to Carolyn Reese during that conference in a way that made Helen's chest tighten. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a particular tone, a particular quality of patience that wasn't really patience at all. Helen had said nothing. She had told herself she didn't have enough information, that she hadn't heard the full exchange, that it wasn't her place to insert herself into someone else's conversation. She had known better. She simply hadn't been brave enough to act on what she knew. She had thought about Carolyn Reese at odd moments for 22 years. In the grocery store, driving home from church, lying awake at 3 in the morning when her mind decided to conduct an inventory of the things she hadn't done that she should have. She looked at the back of Warren Kendrick's head in seat 2A. She was 71 years old now. She had considerably less future to protect and considerably more past to reckon with. The calculation was different at 71 than it had been at 49. You understood by 71 that the moments when you could have said something and didn't were the ones that stayed with you. Not the moments when you spoke up and it was uncomfortable. Those faded. The silences didn't. She kept her phone on her knee. Screen on. Recording. James Whitfield looked across the aisle at Nina Prescott. She looked back at him. No words passed between them. Just the acknowledgement of two people who had independently arrived at the same decision and were watching it unfold in real time. James thought about his friend Marcus. Not a famous man, not a man whose name appeared in any record that the general public would ever access. A man who had served 23 years, who had come forward once to report something he had witnessed that was wrong, who had been believed initially and then not believed, and then reclassified as a problem, and then quietly reassigned to a position that was technically not a demotion and functionally was. Marcus had nothing in the end except his own account of what happened, and his own account without documentation, without timestamps, without the unedited record that existed outside the institution's control, had been insufficient, had been contestable, had been contested. James had learned from Marcus what documentation was actually for, not for the moment when everyone was watching, for the moment afterward when the institution decided what the official story was going to be. When the language got cleaned up and the sequence got rearranged, and the person who had been wrong became the person who had raised concerns, and the person who had been right became the person who had caused a disruption, his hands ached. The arthritis was always worse since a cold, and the cabin was cold. He shifted his grip on the phone, kept it recording. Prescott looked at the yellow package in her lap and thought about 6 days. 6 days was how long her granddaughter had been alive. 6 days of existing in a world that was still in the year they were living in, figuring out who deserved to hit where, who deserved the benefit of the doubt, whose boarding pass was checked and whose was taken at face value, whose discomfort was called fear, and whose legitimate claim was called non-compliance. 6 days old, and already a person who would have to learn to navigate all of it. Nina thought about what she was going to tell her daughter. Not today, not this week. The first weeks of a baby's life were not the time for conversations about what her mother had witnessed on a plane. But eventually, when the baby was old enough to understand it, when the baby was old enough to need it, she was going to say, "I was on a plane once, before you could remember anything, and I watched a man stand in an aisle with a valid boarding pass and refuse to go somewhere else. And the people in authority asked him to leave, and he said no. And it cost him something to see no, not money, not safety, but the particular cost of being the person stand still when the whole system is designed to make you move. And he paid it, without raising his voice, without performing anything for anyone. He just paid it, and I watched that happen, and I kept my phone up. And I want you to know that both of those things mattered, that watching and not looking away is itself a choice, that keeping the record is itself an act, that you don't have to be the person standing in the aisle to be part of the reason the truth survives." She looked at the yellow package. She couldn't wait to hand it over. Dorothy Langford was doing something she had not done once since Warren Kendrick had walked into the aisle. She was thinking, not performing, not defending, not constructing the next position in a negotiation she had entered expecting to win by default. Actually thinking in the way that thinking requires you to stop talking to yourself long enough to hear something you don't already believe. Because Denise Callowab's voice had said a name, Kendrick Dynamics. Dorothy knew that name. She was not entirely certain how she knew it, which bothered her in the way that partial memories always bothered her. The name was there, but the context was just out of reach. Like a word you know perfectly well that refuses to arrive when you need it, Gerald would have known immediately. Gerald read 3 newspapers every day, physical newspapers that he had delivered to the house on a subscription that predated the internet, and that he had refused to cancel on principle. He subscribed to 4 business journals. He talked about companies over dinner with the focused enthusiasm that other men directed at sports teams. The standings, the trades, the long-term strategy, the question of who was going to matter in 10 years. He had said something about Kendrick dynamics. She could reach the memory, but not the content of it. A magazine cover, maybe. Or something he had read aloud from the journal on a Sunday morning, which was the only morning he read at the table, which she had always found slightly irritating and had never said so because some irritations are too small to be worth naming, and now she would give almost anything to be irritated by it again. Kendrick dynamics. Something about artificial intelligence. Something about passenger systems. Something about airlines. She couldn't reach the full shape of it. But the outline was enough to change the temperature of her certainty, because until 30 seconds ago, she had been completely certain. Certain in the architectural way, the kind of certainty that doesn't examine itself because it has never needed to. Certain that the inconvenience was his to manage. Certain that the room was reading the situation the way she was reading it. Certain that the flight attendant and the cabin manager and the captain were all arriving, through the machinery of their professional judgment, at the same conclusion she had reached the moment he walked in, that he should be somewhere else. And now the room had a voice coming out of a phone that knew the full name of every person it was speaking to, and had mentioned legal teams twice. And the captain was not talking. And 3 people in rows 3 and 4 had been recording for the better part of 15 minutes. And Megan Hartwell had her hand over her mouth. And Derek Ormond was studying a dark screen with the intensity of a man who desperately wished it would provide him with an alternative to the present moment. Dorothy clicked the gold clasp on her handbag. Once she had bought the handbag with Gerald in a small shop in Florence on the last trip they had taken before his diagnosis. He had insisted on it. She had said it was too expensive. He had said that she worked hard and she deserved things that lasted. And he had handed over the card with the particular satisfaction of a man who had made a decision and wasn't interested in revisiting it. She clicked the clasp again. The handbag had lasted. Gerald had not. She stared at the seatback in front of her and waited to find out what kind of person she was going to turn out to be in the next 60 seconds. Dorothy moved. She gathered her handbag with hands that were not entirely steady. The gold clasp caught the overhead light. She stood, and for one strange, suspensed moment, she was standing in the aisle beside Warren Kendrick. Close enough he could see what had happened to her face. The certainty was gone. The performance was gone. What remained underneath both of those things was something older and more worn. The face that exists beneath the one people show to rooms they want to manage. She didn't look at him. She started toward 3C, then stopped. 1 step past him, not turning, just stopping. Her hand resting on a seat back, her shoulders doing something he hadn't seen them do once in the past 20 minutes. They dropped. Not in defeat exactly. In the release of something that had been held too long and could no longer be maintained. Gerald always booked the tickets, she said. The cabin had gone still enough that her voice carried without effort. My husband. He always took care of everything on this route. He knew exactly what I wanted without my having to say it. She paused. A very small pause. He passed 8 months ago. Warren said nothing. I got the seat wrong when I booked this one myself. Her voice was flat now, factual. The voice of someone reporting events they would rather not report. I knew I had 3C. I saw 2A was empty when I boarded, and I just sat down. Another pause. It was where he always sat, and I wanted. She stopped. It doesn't matter what I wanted. She started moving again. I still don't have the right to treat you the way I did, said quietly. To no one in the room and to everyone in it simultaneously. But I wanted you to know it wasn't. She stopped again, moved again, and didn't finish the sentence. Because the sentence didn't have an ending that was honest, and also made her look better. And somewhere in the last few minutes, she had run out of the energy required to be dishonest. Warren watched her go. He didn't say anything. Because there was nothing that could be said that was simultaneously true and kind, and he had learned, over a long career of making decisions in rooms where words had consequences, that silence was sometimes the only honest form of mercy. She was wrong. She was also in pain. Both things were true at the same time. Neither one erased the other. That was the part everyone in this situation preferred not to acknowledge because a villain was easier. A clear line was easier. The line was never actually clear. It was just a line, and you had to decide where you stood in relation to it. On the phone, Denise's voice returned. Captain Beckford. Can you confirm that Mr. Kendrick is now seated in his assigned seat? Beckford looked at seat 2A. Warren had lowered himself into it, window seats, left side. Morning light coming through the ovisal glass, golden level, falling across his hands, resting on the armrests. He is. Please confirm for the record that the delay and escalation on this flight resulted from your crew's decision to ask the valid ticket holder to surrender his seat rather than to enforce the actual seat assignment. Derek's head came up. That's not fair, Mr. Ormond. Denise's voice didn't change. Not harder, louder, simply immovable. I have been on this call for 11 minutes. I have heard Captain Beckford confirm Mr. Kendrick's assignment twice. I have heard the crew's offer of alternate seating. I have heard the language used to describe Kendrick's refusal. I have a complete and documented picture of what occurred on this aircraft. Deckeret closed his mouth. Megan, at the edge of the galley, had been fighting tears for several minutes. She was still fighting them. She had the specific stillness of someone who has decided that crying at work is not something they are willing to do, even when they have earned the right to it. She heard what Denise was saying. She heard that it was aimed at her as much as at Derek, maybe more, because she had been the first person in the aisle. She had been the person who looked at 2 boarding passes and knew which one was right, and made a choice that had nothing to do with what was right. Fairness had been available. Before Derek arrived, before Beckford arrived, before the phones went up and the words got said, and the situation became something documented and consequential. Fairness had been available in the moment Megan saw the number 3C on Dorothy Langford's phone and chose to call for backup instead. I have one more thing, Denise said. The cabin listened, all of it. The businessman in row 4 who hadn't reopened his laptop since the captain arrived. The couple in row 5 who had stopped speaking to each other and hadn't started again. The gate agent who had appeared in the doorway at some point and stood very still, Captain Beckford. Derek Ormond, Megan Hartwell, each name spoken clearly, with the particular deliberateness of someone who wanted each person to understand that their name had now been placed in a record that would exist beyond this morning. Please do not delete, alter, or remove any internal notes, passenger records, crew communications, or seat assignment logs related to this flight. Our legal team will be in contact with Meridian Air's executive office within the hour. Silence, Mr. Kendrick. Softer now. For him alone. I'll see you on the ground. Warren looked out the window at Phoenix. Gold and wide. The kind of light fell across everything without preference. Thank you, Denise. He ended the call. The cabin breathed slowly, not all at once. The way tension leaves a space, unevenly, in stages, different people letting go at different speeds depending on how long they'd been holding it. Helen Bradshaw picked up her paperback, held it without opening it. James Whitfield stopped recording, saved the file, sent it to himself. Then sent it to his daughter in Memphis, because she was better at technology, and he wanted a backup that existed somewhere other than his phone. Nina Prescott lowered her phone and looked at the yellow package in her lap. 6 days old. Already a person. Already, in 6 days, someone who would grow up and have to learn how to read rooms and decide when to stay quiet and when to keep recording and when to say the thing out loud, even when it cost something. Dorothy Langford sat in 3C with both hands around her handbag and her eyes on the seat back in front of her. Sitting with whatever it felt like to be in the correct seat for the wrong reasons, Beckford returned to the cockpit. Derek returned to his tablet, not to read it. To have something to look at. Megan wiped her eyes once, the back of her wrist. Quick. Then straightened her jacket and walked to row 2. She placed a glass of water on Warren's side table. No words, no speech, no elaborately constructed apology, just water, the smallest possible human gesture. Late, but present. Warren looked at the glass, then at her. She met his eyes for exactly 1 second. Then she moved away. He looked out the window. The jet bridge was still attached. The door was still open. The plane had not moved, but the call had been made. The record existed. The names were in a document. His phone buzzed once on his knee. A message from Denise. Meridian Air Executive Office just picked up. They're asking questions. Hold position. Warren read it, locked the phone, set it face down. He looked at Phoenix, the gold morning, the mountains, blue and still beyond the perimeter. He thought about his father, Emmett Kendrick, Route 22, every morning. The dignity that never asked for acknowledgement because it didn't need full of people to confirm its validity. He had not moved, not once this morning. He exhaled, and at the front of the aircraft, something was beginning. The gate agent, Carolyn Webb, had reappeared in the doorway, 44 years old, 6 years on this gate. In the last 14 minutes, she had received 3 calls from 3 separate levels of Meridian Air's organizational structure, each one from a higher floor than the last. She walked to Derek Ormond and spoke quietly into his ear. Derek's expression moved through 3 stages. First, confusion. Then, the specific look of a person realizing that a problem they believed they had contained is significantly larger than they understood. Then, something close enough to fear that the distinction wasn't worth making. Carolyn stepped back, looked toward 2A. Warren Kendrick was looking out the window with the unhurried quality of a man who had done what he needed to do and was waiting for the world to finish catching up, which it was becoming clear to everyone in first class it was about to do. Carolyn raised her radio, Gate B14 to operations. Her voice was even, professional. The voice of someone who has received clear instructions and is carrying them out. Flight 58 is holding at the gate. Pending review. The word moved through the cabin quietly. Holding, not boarding, not preparing for departure. Not doing any of the things a plane at a gate in the morning is supposed to do. Holding. Beckford's voice came from the cockpit doorway immediately. Holding for what reason? Carolyn looked at him, then at Warren. Then back Beckford. Passenger discrimination review, she said. Executive operations request. The words entered the cabin like something dropped into still water. The ripples moved outward through every row. Passenger discrimination review. Not a seat dispute. Not a boarding delay. Not a miscommunication between 2 passengers about which row they were assigned to. A discrimination review. Dorothy heard it from 3C. Her hands tightened on her handbag. Derek heard it and stopped moving entirely. His tablet hung from one hand, forgotten. Beckford stood in the cockpit doorway, and for the first time since he had walked through first class, and the cabin temperature had dropped from his presence. For the first time this morning, Captain Howard Beckford looked like a man who understood the full dimensions of the mistake he had made. And Warren Kendrick looked out the window at the gold Phoenix morning and said nothing, because the record was already speaking. The plane didn't move. That was the first thing. The engines hadn't cycled up to that low, purposeful hum that meant departure was close. The jet bridge was still locked against the fuselage. The boarding door was still open to the Phoenix morning. Outside the oval windows, the tarmac went about its business. Ground crews, fuel trucks, the geometry of an airport morning, while Flight 628 sat at Gate B14 and held. Every person in first class understood, without being told, that this was no longer about a schedule. Carolyn Webb stood at the aircraft door, with her radio pressed against her chest and the expression of someone managing instructions arriving from several directions simultaneously. In the past 12 minutes, she had received 4 calls. The first from her direct supervisor, the second from the gate operations manager, the third from someone in the regional office whose extension she didn't recognize. The fourth from a number that routed through Meridian Air's executive's switchboard, from a woman named Diane who spoke with the particular precision of someone accustomed to calls that ended up in reports. Instructions were clear. Hold the aircraft. Do not depart. A VP of Customer Integrity was on her way from the Meridian Air administrative offices on the north side of the terminal. She would be on board within 15 minutes. Carolyn had passed this information to Derek Ormond quietly at the galley entrance. Derek's face had moved through 3 distinct expressions in the space of about 4 seconds. The first was confusion, the expression of someone receiving information that doesn't match the category they believed they were in. The second was the recalibration of a person understanding that the category was larger than they thought. The third was something that lived in the neighborhood of fear and was close enough that the distinction wasn't worth making. He was standing near the galley now with his tablet hanging from one hand, screen dark, not consulting it, not using it as a prop, just holding it because his hand needed something to do. Megan Hartwell stood slightly behind him. Not visible until you're specifically looking. She was looking at her hands. The hands that had checked 2 boarding passes and known with complete clarity which one was right. That knowing had a different weight now than it had carried 40 minutes ago in the aisle. 40 minutes ago, the knowing had been a problem to manage, something she needed to hand to someone with more authority, someone who could absorb the consequences of the decision that the knowing required. Now the knowing was something she had to live inside, something she was going to carry off this plane and onto the next one and the one after that. She was thinking specifically about the word fairness, about how she had thought of herself as a fair person, about the school drives she donated to every December, about the elderly passengers she remembered by name and whose coffee preferences she kept in a mental file, about the fact that she had genuinely believed, until approximately 35 minutes ago, that being fair was something you were rather than something you did, a quality rather than a continuous choice. The choice had been available before Derek arrived, before Captain Beckford arrived, before the phones went up and the words were said and the situation became something with witnesses and recordings and a COO on speaker. The choice had been available the moment she looked at 2 boarding passes and saw the number 3C on Dorothy Langford's phone. She had not made it. Beckford stood in the cockpit doorway. He had not returned to his seat. He was watching the cabin with the alert stillness of a man who has been a pilot for 30 years and has learned to identify very quickly which instruments are giving him accurate readings and which he has been misreading. He was recalibrating. He had confirmed Warren Kendrick's boarding pass twice, out loud. Tua's name was now in a call record that is on a server outside Meridian Air's control. He had confirmed Dorothy Langford's boarding pass. He had asked Warren Kendrick to move anyway. He was thinking about the word judgment. Denise Calloway had used it deliberately. He understood that now in a way he hadn't understood it in the moment, when he had been focused on the departure clock and the passenger complaint history and the particular way a senior flyer like Dorothy Langford could, and had, made an employee's professional life very difficult with a well-constructed email. We are documenting your judgment, not his authority, not his procedure, his judgment, his assessment of who mattered more when the facts were equally clear about both of them, his decision about whose discomfort was a problem to be managed and whose boarding pass was a technicality to be worked around. He stood in the doorway and thought about that word and waited for whatever came next. Warren was looking out the window, Phoenix. Gold morning light on the tarmac, the mountains, blue and patient beyond the airport fence, sitting in the distance the way they always sat, without opinion, without preference, without any investment in what the people below them decided to do. He wasn't thinking about the contract. Not yet. That would come on the ground with Denise. In the ordinary, productive language of business, he was thinking about his father. Not the message specifically. The image underneath the message. Emmett Kendrick behind the wheel of Route 22. The particular quality of how he held himself when he drove. Settled. Present. The bus was his vehicle and his route, and he operated it with a precision that didn't ask anyone in the seats behind him to notice. That didn't need their noticing to be real. Warren had grown up watching that and not fully understanding what he was watching until the day he sat in a conference room with glass walls and felt the familiar pressure. The pressure to something, to announce himself, to make himself legible in the specific way that the room required, and instead of doing it, he had heard his father's voice, not the text message. Earlier than that. His father at the kitchen table when Warren was 12 years old, telling him something that Warren had half understood at the time and had spent the next 30 years completing his understanding of, you don't perform worth, you know it. And you let other people's choices be their own problem. He looked at the Phoenix Mountains. He was going to get home to his daughter's birthday dinner. Everything else was already in motion. His phone buzzed. He looked at it. Denise. 2 more calls from Meridian Air Executive Office. They've escalated to VP level internally. Victoria Lane, VP Customer Integrity, is heading to the gate now. She'll board within 15 minutes. Her role is to conduct the formal review and manage consequences. Beckford already corrected the immediate situation on the plane, so she's handling what comes after. Sit tight. Warren read it twice. Beckford had corrected it on the plane. Victoria Lane was coming to handle the formal record, the consequences for the crew, and the conversation with Dorothy that needed to happen at the gate rather than in a cabin full of people with recording devices. That was the right structure. Clean. The immediate wrong corrected by the person who had made it. The institutional accountability handled by the institutional representative. Both things happening. Neither one substituting for the other. He set the phone face down on his knee. He was sitting tight. Two people appeared at the aircraft door 14 minutes later. A woman in a charcoal suit, dark steady eyes, a tablet under her arm, hair pulled back in a low practical arrangement. Behind her, a man in his mid-50s, pale in the particular way of someone who has just been handed a situation they were not expecting to manage today, Victoria Lane. Vice President of Customer Integrity, Meridian Air, roped Hale. Regional Operations Director, Southwest Division. They boarded without pausing at the door. Victoria's eyes swept the cabin in one controlled arc before she had fully cleared the threshold, taking inventory. The kind of assessment that resolves a room in under 5 seconds and misses nothing important. She did not look at Dorothy first. She did not look at Derek, who had straightened when she appeared and was now holding his tablet with both hands like it might be useful. She looked at seat 2A, at Warren Kendrick. Something moved across her face. Brief, not an expression exactly. More like the surface of something deeper shifting. A recognition that had nothing to do with his name or his company or anything Denise Calloway had said on a phone 40 minutes ago. Something she had been carrying for 11 years. Victoria Lane was 44 years old, 11 years with Meridian Air. Before that, 2 regional carriers where she had learned the industry from the operational level upward. Scheduling, logistics, crew management. The 1,000 small decisions that kept aircraft moving and passengers in their seats. And the whole enormous machinery of commercial aviation doing what it was designed to do. Before that, a business degree from a state school she had worked 3 jobs to afford. A summer job at a regional airport that had made her certain, in the way that certainty arrives at 22 before life has had time to complicate it, that this was the industry she wanted. She had taken her first-class flight at 28. A work trip. An upgrade offered at the gate because economy was oversold and she was first on the upgrade list. A fact she had felt an unreasonable amount of pleasure about because it was the first time she had been first on any list in her professional life. She had settled into the seat carefully, the way you settle into a space when it doesn't quite feel like yours yet. When you're still learning whether you belong in it or are just visiting. She had found a man already in her seat. Older, gray suit. A particular certainty about him, the certainty of someone who has occupied these seats so many times that the question of who the seats actually belongs to has long since stopped occurring to him. The flight attendant had appeared, had looked at both of them, had offered Victoria the seat across the aisle with a smile that was genuinely apologetic and completely decisive. Still first class, perfectly comfortable, no real inconvenience. Victoria had taken it. She was 28 years old. She was new to the kind of rooms that came with first-class tickets. She hadn't yet learned that the first time you accept being moved, without making it a problem, you are teaching something to the room. Something about what kind of resistance you will offer, and what kind you won't. Something the room will remember even when you've forgotten teaching it. She had thought about that flight for 11 years. Not obsessively. Not every day. But it came back to her at specific moments. When she sat in a meeting and heard a version of her idea attributed to someone who hadn't been in the room when she said it. When she arrived at a conference and the registration table, Vontier looked past her shoulder before looking at her. When she recommended someone for a promotion and was asked, with genuine curiosity, what her basis for confidence was. A question she had never heard asked about a recommendation she hadn't made. The flight came back in those moments. The seat she had accepted not being in, she had built an entire department, over 11 years, around the principle that no passenger should have to make the calculation she had made on that flight. The calculation of whether the seat was worth the fight. Whether the fight was worth the attention it would draw. Whether the attention was worth the discomfort of a cabin full of strangers watching you insist on something you were already supposed to have. That calculation had a cost. Victoria had spent 11 years trying to quantify it, because quantifying things was how you made institutions takes them seriously. The cost in customer satisfaction scores, in repeat business, In the particular kind of loyalty that came from a passenger who had a problem and watched it get handled correctly versus the particular kind of damage that came from a passenger who had a problem and watched themselves become the problem. She had numbers, good numbers, numbers that made the executive team listen. But the reason she had built the department, the actual reason, underneath the numbers, was a flight from 11 years ago and a seat she had accepted not being in, and the specific quality of what that acceptance had cost her in the years since. She cleared her throat, Mr. Kendrick. Warren turned from the window. I'm Victoria Lane, Vice President of Customer Integrity, Meridian Air. She stopped at his row, not sot-sitting. Standing at his level direct, without the slight forward lean that could read as either deference or condescension, depending on who was doing it. I want to apologize for what occurred on this aircraft this morning. Warren looked at her with the careful attention he gave to everything, looking for what was real beneath what was presented. For the gap, if there was one, between the official statement and the person making it. Thank you, he said, exactly and only what the moment had earned. Not warmth offered as courtesy, and not coldness offered as punishment. Victoria held his gaze for a moment. Then she stepped back and looked at Robert Hale, who was standing just behind her right shoulder, with the expression of a man who has received very clear instructions and is grateful for their clarity. Mr. Hale will speak with the crew, she said to Warren. I'll handle Mrs. Langford at the gate. Everything that happened on this aircraft is part of the formal review, which begins today. Robert nodded. He moved toward Derek, who had materialized near the galley entrance with the prompt availability of someone who has been expecting this and has adopted that prompt plan is the only thing he's left offer, Mr. Ormond. The galley, please. Derek moved without hesitation. The movement of a man walking towards something he cannot avoid and has decided to stop trying to. Victoria looked at Megan. Miss Hartwell. You as well. Megan nodded. She had the specific expressions of someone who has been dreading a particular moment for long enough that when it arrives, dread converts into something close to relief. The waiting had been its own particular punishment. Whatever came next was at least the real thing. She started toward the galley, then stopped at seat 2A. Warren looked up. Megan had 3 different versions of an apology assembled in her head. She had been composing them since approximately the moment Denise Calloway's voice came through the phone speaker, and the full weight of the previous 20 minutes settled onto her with complete clarity. 3 versions. None of them addressed the actual center of the thing. She let them go. I should have moved her the moment I checked the boarding passes, she said. She had stopped fighting the tears, and they still hadn't fallen, which she took as evidence of something she didn't have a word for yet. I knew. I was standing right there, and I knew, and I didn't do it. Warren looked at her, not with the warm forgiveness that would have let her walk away, resolved and lighter, with something more demanding than that. More honest, yes, he said. You knew. Megan absorbed both words. She reached into her jacket pocket and took out a business card, her own. Megan Hartwell, Meridian Air, with her direct contact information and her email. She set it on the empty seat beside Warren, not handing it to him, just placing it there. I'm going to file a full incident report tonight, she said. Everything, in sequence. My own account, in my own words. I wanted you to know that before I go in there, she nodded toward the galley, and I wanted you to have a way to confirm it was done. Warren looked at the card, then at her. The next time will be different, he said. Make sure of that she picked up something from those words that she would carry for a long time. Not the instruction. She had already given herself the instruction. Something in the way he said it. Like it was a statement of fact rather than a directive. Like he believed it was already true. She nodded once and walked into the galley. Victoria watched her go, then turned back to the other side of the aisle. Dorothy Langford sat in 3C with both hands closed around her handbag, and the careful stillness of a woman who has spent the past 10 minutes constructing a position and is holding it with the discipline of someone who understands that the position is the last thing she has. Mrs. Langford, Victoria said. We need to speak with you at the gate. Dorothy looked up. Her chin came up with it. About what, exactly? Your conduct during this incident is part of the review. I haven't done anything wrong. The cabin heard it. Every person who had been on this plane for the past 50 minutes heard Dorothy Langford say, clearly, without hesitation, that she had done nothing wrong. Helen Bradshaw made a sound, small, not words. The sound a person expressed they ever reached the limit of their capacity to receive new information without some physical acknowledgement of it. Dorothy pressed forward. Her voice had the quality of someone who has decided that the best defense is to keep moving. I was seated, I was speaking. I was simply as expressing a point of view. Mrs. Langford. Victoria's voice was the same. It had a quality of stillness that wasn't cold. The stillness of someone who has had this conversation before, in different forms with different people, and has learned that matching the other person's energy doesn't serve anyone. Your statements have been recorded by multiple passengers in this cabin. Your conduct and the specific words you used are documented. The review will cover all of it. A pause. Dorsey searching for something. Then the last defense. The one that had felt, until approximately 20 minutes ago, like it should be sufficient. I didn't know who he was, she said. The cabin went very still. Victoria looked at her for a long moment. Every passenger on this aircraft, Victoria said, deserves to sit in their assigned seat. Regardless of who they are, she let that settle. Then, quieter, not for the cabin. For Dorothy specifically, I know that because there was a time when some said those exact words to me, and no one in that cabin thought it was necessary to act on them. Dorothy blinked. Something shifted in her face. The architecture of the position she had been holding developed a crack, not collapse. A crack, please gather your things, Victoria said. We'll speak at the gate. She stepped back to give Dorothy room to stand. Then she looked at Robert Hale, who had emerged from the galley and was standing at the galley entrance with the controlled expression of someone who has just had several difficult conversations and is ready to have another one. Robert caught her eye and gave a small nod. He would accompany Dorothy to the gate. He would manage the formal portion of that conversation, while Victoria completed her interaction with the crew. They had divided the responsibilities on the walk over from the administrative offices, and the division was clear. He moved toward the front of the aircraft to wait. Victoria turned to the other side of the aisle. Dorothy Langford sat in 3C with her handbag in her lap, and both hands closed around it, and the careful stillness of a woman as in who has been waiting for this, and has spent the wait constructing a position. Mrs. Langford, Victoria said. We need to speak with you at the gate. Dorothy looked up. Her chin came up with it. About what, exactly? Your conduct during this incident is part of the review. I haven't done anything wrong, the cabin heard it. Every person on this plane who had been present for the last 45 minutes heard Dorothy Langford say, clearly and without hesitation, that she had done nothing wrong. Helen Bradshaw made a sound. Small, not words. The kind of sound a person makes when they have heard something that requires a response and have decided that the response doesn't need to be verbal. Dorothy pressed forward. I was seated. I was speaking. I was simply expressing, Mrs. Langford. Victoria's voice was unchanged. It had a quality of stillness that wasn't cold. It was the stillness of someone who has had this conversation before, in different forms, and has learned that matching the other person's energy doesn't serve anyone. Your statements have been recorded by multiple passengers in this cabin. Your conduct and the words you used are documented. The review will cover all of it. A pause, Dorothy's last defense. The one she had been holding in reserve without fully realizing it. The one that felt, to her, like it should change everything. I didn't know who he was, she said. The cabin held very still. Victoria looked at her for a long moment, long enough to let the sentence exist fully in the space between them. Every passenger on this aircraft, Victoria said, deserves to sit in their assigned seat. Regardless of who they are, she let that settle. Then, quieter. Not for the cabin, just for Dorothy. I know that because there was a time when someone said those exact words to me. And no one in that cabin believed it was necessary. Dorothy blinked. Something moved in her face. A small, uncertain shift. The first crack in the architectural certainty she had maintained since she sat down in seat 2A 3 hours ago. Please gather your things, Victoria said. We'll speak at gate. Dorothy stood. Her movements were careful in a way they hadn't been all morning. No longer the fluid, settled movements of a woman who knew herself to be in command of the room. These were deliberate movements. The movements of someone who understood that people were watching and was trying to hold on to the last available version of dignity. She adjusted the strap of her handbag, lifted her chin. walked toward the front of the aircraft with the measured pace of a person who has decided that composure is the only thing remaining and is going to maintain it for the distance between row 3 and the aircraft door. She passed seat 2A. Stop. One step past it, not turning back toward Warren, just stopping, with her hand resting a seat back and her face toward the forward galley. Warren didn't look at her immediately. He was looking at Phoenix. Still gold, still there. Then he turned. Dorothy's face had changed entirely from what it had been when he walked into the aisle. The certainty was gone. The performance was gone. The elaborate architecture of a woman who knew how to occupy a room was gone. What was left was something older, more worn. The face that exists beneath the faces we show to the world when we need the world to see something specific. I was wrong, she said. About what I said, Warren waited. I don't expect you to. She stopped. Started again from a different place. Gerald used to say that fear was just grief that had forgotten where it was going. Her voice was careful. The way you handle something fragile, not because it belongs to the other person, but because it belongs to you and you are finally holding it honestly. I think I've been afraid for 8 months, and I didn't know where to put it. She looked at his face, looking for something. Not absolution, something more basic. The acknowledgement that she had said a true thing, that the true thing had been received. Warren was quiet for a moment then. I'm sorry you're her husband. Not, it's understandable. Not, I forgive you. Not the easy grace that would have cost him nothing and meant nothing. Not a lie constructed from kindness, just the one true thing. The only part of her story that deserved uncomplicated compassion offered without condition. Dorothy nodded. Once, very small, and walked off the plane. The cabin breathed, not all at once, unevenly. The way tension dissipates from a room, by degrees and stages, different people releasing it at different speeds depending on how long they'd been holding it and how tightly. Helen Bradshaw opened her paperback. The mystery set in Edinburgh that she'd bought 3 weeks ago and kept meaning to start. She read the first page, then the second, then set it down again. She wasn't going to read. Not right now. She was thinking about her classroom. 36 years of children. The ones who acted the worst were almost always the ones carrying the heaviest things. The cruelest behavior she had ever witnessed from a child had come from a boy whose home life she later learned had been devastating for years. She hadn't known at the time. She had only known the behavior. And she had held both things separately. The behavior was real and unacceptable, and the pain underneath it was real and needed attention. And she had never confused one for an excuse for the other. She looked towards seat 2A. Warren was looking at his phone. His face had the expression of a man returning to the ordinary world after an extended time away. Not relief exactly. More like the adjustment of focus when you move from something close and intense to something broad and ordinary. Helen almost said something, then decided against it. Some moments didn't need words added to them. Some moments only needed witnessing. She had witnessed this one. She picked up her paperback again. This time she read. James Whitfield sent the video to his daughter in Memphis a second time, using a different method than the first, because he had learned over a long career that redundancy in documentation was not paranoia but professionalism. Then he sat back and looked at the overhead bin above his seat and thought about the things he had seen in 25 years of service. He had seen institutions do what this one had done. Reach for official language when cornered. Use the machinery of procedure to bury a fact that had become inconvenient. He had seen it done to colleagues. He had seen it done to men he respected deeply, men who had done nothing wrong except exist in places where their existing was, to certain people, a problem requiring management. He had learned early that the only protection was the record, the document, the timestamp, the unedited footage that existed outside the institution's control. He was glad Nina had started recording first. He was glad he had followed. He was glad Helen had said, out loud, what she had said, because her saying it was itself a form of documentation. A witness on record. He was especially glad that Warren Kendrick had not given anyone anger, because anger could be edited. Anger could be recontextualized. Anger became, in the institutional retelling, evidence that the person with the anger was the problem. He had seen it happen too many times to doubt it. Stillness was harder to argue with. Precision was harder to argue with. A man who said exactly what happened, in exact sequence, without embellishment, and then waited. That was much harder to reframe than a man who shouted. His hands hurt. He rested them on the armrests. Nina Prescott held the yellow package the way she had held it since the gate. She wasn't putting it in the overhead bin. She wanted to hold it for the whole flight. It was the most tangible proof available to her that this morning was somewhere good, that the day had a destination worth reaching. She thought about what she had watched for the past hour. She was going to carry it, not as a story to tell immediately, but as something she would hold and examine and understand more fully over time, the way certain experiences only give up their full meaning slowly. I watched a man stay in his seat. That was the core of it, simple and not simple at all. And the staying mattered. Robert Hale came out of the galley first. His face had the controlled flatness of a man who has just had several conversations he is going to need to think carefully about for a considerable amount of time. He approached seat 2A. Warren looked up. Mr. Kendrick. Robert's voice was professional, measured. The voice of someone working from an internal script about how to address this specific situation, staying the script because the script existed for moments exactly like this one. On behalf of Meridian Air, I want to formally apologize for the experience you had on this aircraft this morning. We take incidents of this nature, Mr. Hale. Robert stopped. Warren's voice was not unkind, but it was very precise. Is the apology for what happened, or for the fact that it was recorded? A pause, brief, but real. Robert cleared his throat. For what happened, sir, and for the failures on the part of our crew that allowed it to escalate the way it did. Warren held his gaze for one more moment. Then I'll accept it from the airline, he says. The individuals involved, I'll hear from them directly. Robert nodded. He understood what that meant. He went back to the galley. Victoria was the last one out. She came and stood at the end of Warren's row, not sitting, not hovering, standing with the stillness of someone who has one more thing to say and is making sure they say it correctly. 11 years ago, she said, I took a flight similar to this one. Warren looked at her. Someone was in my seat, she said. The crew asked me to move. She paused. I moved. I've thought about cost for that 11 years. Warren waited. I took this job because I didn't want other people to have to make that calculation, she said. The seat was worth fighting for. Whether the fight was worth the room watching, she met his eyes directly. You didn't go quietly? No. Warren said, good simply, without performance. Our legal team will be in internal review begins today. All documentation from this flight, crew records, communication logs, seat assignments, will be preserved and reviewed. She paused one more time. I'm glad you were on this flight, Mr. Kendrick. Warren considered that. I'm not sure glad is the word I'd use. Victoria almost smiled. Not quite, but close. No, probably not. She straightened. Safe travels. She walked off the plane. Robert followed. The gate agent came back on board 3 minutes later, Carolyn Webb, steadier than she'd been. The instructions had been received and were clear. She knew what she was doing now. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, with the practiced projection of someone who has made 1,000 announcements and knows that tone carries before content does. We apologize for the delay on Flight 628. We will be departing shortly. Thank you for your patience. Nothing else. No explanation. No counting of what had occurred. Just departing shortly. The institutional minimum, the jet bridge detached, the cabin door sealed. The crew moved through the departure routine. Megan came out of the galley and began the safety demonstration. Her movements were correct. Her voice was the right volume. Her hands moved through the prescribed gestures with practiced accuracy. But when she walked down the aisle and reached row 2, she paused for half a second, barely perceptible, not enough for most people to notice, and placed her hand flat on the headrest of the empty seat beside Warren. Not as a gesture to him, not as a performance, just as something she needed to do, like touching a wall to steady yourself. Then she continued down the aisle. Warren noticed he didn't say anything. The engines cycled up. That low, purposeful sound that meant the ordinary world was reassembling itself around Flight 628. That meant the plane was finally 53 minutes behind schedule, going to do what it had been built to do. Warren looked out the window as the aircraft began to move, Phoenix sliding past, the terminal receding, the broad tarmac opening up, the mountains, blue and patient, growing briefly larger as the aircraft turned, and then beginning their slow fall toward the horizons. He picked up his phone, texted Denise. On the way. talk on the ground. Then he stayed on the thread for a moment, then scrolled up to the older one. The name at the top that hadn't sent a new message in 3 years, 2 months, and 11 days. He read it one more time. Don't ever make yourself smaller so other people can feel more comfortable. That's not kindness, that's surrender. Love, Dad. He locked the phone, put it in his jacket pocket, and looked out the window as Phoenix fell away beneath him and the world got quiet. The flight was 2 hours and 11 minutes. Helen Bradshaw read her mysteries set in Edinburgh. Actually read it this time, with a sustained attention that had been unavailable to her for the first hour of the morning. The book turned out to be very good. She read 60 pages before the descent began, which was more than she had read in a single sitting in several months. When the seatbelt sign came on for descent, she folded the corner of her page. She had stopped doing this years ago. It damaged the spine, and she had opinions about that. But she didn't have a bookmark, and she wasn't willing to lose the page. She looked toward seat 2A. Warren had his laptop open. He was working. Reading something, making notes. The ordinary productivity of a man on a plane, entirely unremarkable from the outside, entirely different from what it would have been if the morning had gone the way it was supposed to. Helen thought about the call she was going to make when she landed. To her sister in Tucson, who she spoke to every Sunday and sometimes on Tuesdays when something had happened that couldn't wait. This was a Tuesday call. She was going to tell her sister what she had seen. Not for drama, not to recount the spectacle of it, because her sister was 73 and had her own catalog of moments and would understand without Helen having to explain why the watching and the recording and the not looking away had mattered as much as anything anyone said out loud. She looked out her window at the Texas landscape appearing below, flat and brown and enormous in every direction. She felt, for the first time since boarding, something that was uncomplicated, glad James Sims Whitfield achieved the sleepy-adjacent state he had learned in 25 years of finding rest in conditions that didn't invite it. His hands rested on the armrests, stiff and still. His breathing was slow, his eyes were closed. Whether actual slap sand was unclear and beside the point.
His body was resting and his mind was
doing whatever it needed to do. When the seatbelt sign came on, he opened his eyes immediately, the way he always did, with the complete alertness of someone who had never fully stopped paying attention. He looked at his phone. The video file was saved in 3 places now. One on the phone. One sent to his daughter in Memphis. One uploaded to a cloud service his daughter had set up for him 2 Christmases ago that he had initially resisted and now found extremely useful. He looked toward 2A. Warren was closing his laptop. James had met men like Warren Kendrick before. Not many. Men who understood that the point was to win the moment, but to build something that outlasted it. Who understood that the record mattered more than the reaction. Who could be angry. Who had every right to be angry, whose anger would have been entirely justified, and chose instead to be precise. That kind of discipline was rarer than people thought. It looked like calm from the outside. It was not calm. It was the result of understanding at a very deep level what you were actually trying to accomplish, and what you were willing to pay for it. James had spent 25 years trying to learn that distinction. He wasn't sure he had gotten there, but he recognized it when he saw it. Nina Prescott held the yellow package in her lap for every minute of the 2 hours and 11 minutes. She decided before boarding that she wasn't going to put it overhead, and she maintained this decision through the turbulence over New Mexico and the curious look from the passenger across the aisle. And the moment when the cart came through and the flight attendant had to angle around her to reach the seat beside her. The package contained a stuffed rabbit. White, with moss-soft ears. She had ordered it 6 weeks ago, before the baby arrived, before they knew the gender, before anything was certain, except that she was going to be a grandmother, and she wanted the first she gave to be something that lasted. She was going to walk into a hospital room in approximately 2 hours and 40 minutes and meet a 6-day-old person for the first time. That fact was so large and so good that it made everything else that had happened this morning feel like what it was. Important, real, worth witnessing, but not the main event. The main event was still ahead. Warren worked, reviewed the board packet, made notes on the Meridian Air Partnership overview, read the market analysis, let his mind do the ordinary work it was built to do, which was a form of gratitude in itself. The fact that the morning had not taken this from him, that he had not been removed from the aircraft, that the record existed, that the outcome, messy and slow and imperfect as institutional outcomes always were, was moving in the right direction. Around 50 minutes into the flight, Denise messaged. Meridian Air Executive Office called again. Third call since we landed the call on the plane. Their tone is different now, considerably. Warren, what did you tell them? That you'd be available after 5. I haven't told them you were on one of their planes. Seemed worth letting them arrive at that discovery on their own timeline. Warren almost smiled at that. They asked about the contract. Warren looked out the window. Texas below. Flat and patient and going on in every direction without asking anyone's permission. We're not reconsidering, he typed back. Call them tomorrow. Tell them we're moving forward. Expanded scope. Denise, how expanded? Full deployment of the bias detection module. Mandatory, all crew classifications. The Flight 628 team as the pilot cohort. Non-negotiable. He looked at the words pilot cohort for a moment. That's going to be a hard conversation. Yes. They might push back on the pilot cohort element specifically. They might. And if they do? Warren looked at the Texas landscape, the wide, flat, patient ground. Then we find out what kind of company they want to be going forward. He put the phone away, closed his eyes for 20 minutes. Not sleep, rest. The kind that requires you to decide deliberately, to let go of the thing you've been holding, just for a little while, just long enough to restore the capacity to hold it again. When he opened his eyes, they were beginning the descent into Dallas. He put his laptop in his bag, straightened his jacket, looked out the window at the city assembling itself below, the highways, the neighborhoods arranged around the logic of water and roads, the particular geometry of a place you've come home to enough times that you recognize its shapes from the air. His daughter was somewhere in that city. He checked his phone. 3 messages from Simone. The first, sent at 7:42 a.m. Phoenix time, which was 9:42 a.m. Dallas time, which was shortly after the plane had taken off. Dad, are you actually on the plane? The second, sent at 8:15 a.m. Phoenix time. Dad, the reservation is at 7, not 7:15, not 7. The third, sent at 9:48 a.m. Phoenix time, which was 11:48 a.m. Dallas time. If you missed the flight because of something work-related, I'm telling Grandma it was your idea to put her at the hotel. I am not joking. Warren read the last one twice. He was smile-sing when the wheels touched down. The plane rolled to the gate. The jet bridge extended. The door opened, and the sounds of Dallas-Fort Worth in the late morning came flooding in. People stood. The choreography of arrival. Warren stayed in his seat until the aisle was mostly clear. He always did. There was no point in standing in an aisle for 8 minutes when you could sit and use 8 minutes for something. He was looking at Simone's messages when James Whitfield stopped at his row. Warren stood. James had his carry-on over one shoulder and his hand out, directly, without preamble. The way a handshake is offered when the handshake is the entire thing and the words around it are optional. Warren took it. James's grip was firm, deliberate. The grip of a man who has decided that his hands are going to do what he asks them to do, regardless of what they feel like. I've been watching people get moved my whole life, James said, low. For Warren. Glad someone finally stayed. Warren held the handshake a moment, past the moment. Thank you for recording it, he said. Seriously. That matters more than most people understand. James gave him the look of a man for whom this had never been a question. Then he moved toward the exit. Helen Bradshaw was right behind him. She stopped at Warren's row. She didn't offer her hand. She looked at him with 71 years of accumulated clarity, the particular clarity that comes from a lifetime of paying attention to the things that mattered and having developed, through that practice, a very reliable sense of when a thing was being named correctly. You handled that with a great deal of grace, she said. Warren shook his head slightly. I'm not sure grace is the right word. It is, she said, with the finality of a woman who has spent 3.5 decades knowing exactly which word was right and is not interested in being argued out of it. It's exactly the right word. Grace isn't the absence of anger. It's what you do with it. She looked at him for one more moment. She did something unexpected. She reached out and briefly, lightly, put her hand on his forearm. Just for a second. The gesture of a teacher at the end of a lesson that mattered. Then she walked off the plane. Warren stood at his row for a moment after she was gone, looking at the place where her hand had been on his sleeve. Then Nina Prescott appeared, yellow package under one arm, carry on in the other hand, the complete happiness of a woman on her way to something irreplaceable, visible in every part of her face. "I'm going to meet my granddaughter today," she said. "She's six days old," Warren smiled, "the real kind. Congratulations. I'm going to tell her about this flight someday." Nina glanced around the emptying cabin. "When she's old enough. I'm going to tell her I watched a man stay in his seat and that the staying mattered." She paused. "I want her to know that it always matters." Every time." Warren looked at the yellow package, at the specific, undiluted happiness of a person carrying something towards someone who didn't know yet that they were loved. "Give her my best," he said. Nina smiled and walked off the plane. Warren was last. He picked up his carry-on, straightened his jacket, took one look back at seat 2A, the window left side. Morning light gone now, replaced by the flat noon light of Dallas, just a seat. Fabric and armrests and an oval window showing you the world from a different angle than you're used to. He walked to the front of the aircraft. Megan Hartwell was at the door. When Warren reached her, she said nothing from the standard script. She said, "I'm going to do better, not asking for something." Making a statement to a specific person, intended to be remembered. "Good," Warren said, and meant it completely. He walked off the plane. The terminal at Dallas-Fort Worth at 11:45 in the morning was indifferent to everything that had happened on Flight 628. People rushing to connections. A family with too much luggage and not enough hands. Two men in suits having a conversation neither of them would remember by Friday cluster. Housed to sleep across two chairs with a stuffed giraffe covering most of her face. The ordinary world. Warren walked through it toward baggage claim. A message from Denise arrived before he reached the escalator. Meridian Air accepted the expanded scope. All conditions, full bias detection, module deployment across all crew classifications. Flight 628, team as pilot cohort, beginning next quarter. They want the kickoff call next week. Warren stopped at the top of the escalator. Write it again. He thought about Captain Beckford standing in a cockpit doorway, about Derek Ormond and a dark tablet screen, about Megan Hartwell with her hand over her mouth, and then this morning a business card placed on an empty seat, about Dorothy Langford at a gate in Phoenix right now, in a conversation with Victoria Lane and Robert Hale that she had not expected to have, sitting with the knowledge that grief and harmful behavior could exist in the same person simultaneously, that one did not explain away the other, and that the only place to begin was at the beginning of honesty, about the bias detection module, what it was designed to find, not the Dorothy Langfords of the world, the ones whose behavior was visible and audible, and, when recorded, undeniable. The module wasn't designed for them. It was designed for the Megan Hartwells. The half-second of knowing and choosing differently. The fear that made a small choice that rippled forward in ways nobody tracked because nobody had been looking at the aggregate. Until now, he typed back. Good. He stepped onto the escalator. Simone was outside baggage claim, 14 years old, 5'7" as of her last checkup. Phone in both hands, scanning the arriving passengers with the focused attention of someone who has sent 3 messages in the past 2 hours and is prepared to register both relief and displeasure simultaneously upon visual confirmation of the target. She saw him, put the phone in her pocket, walked toward him with the careful casualness of a teenager who has decided that running is excessive. She stopped. "You're on time," she said. "I told you I would be. You told me with a thumbs-up emoji. That's a commitment. That's a deflection." Warren put his arm around her shoulders. She let him, which was not guaranteed and was therefore worth noting. "How was the flight?" she asked. They walked toward the exit. He thought about 30 seconds of someone deciding who he was before he said a word. About a boarding pass and an aisle, and the particular weight of somewhere else carried across a life. About a retired schoolteacher who kept her phone ready just in case and knew exactly what grace meant. About a veteran with arthritic hands who kept recording because he understood what records were actually for. About a nurse holding a yellow package on her way to something new about his father. Route 22. "Every morning I sat in my seat," he said. Simone looked up at him. "What does that mean?" And pushed open the terminal door. "Dallas at noon. Hot and bright and going on in every direction. It means I came home," he said. Simone considered this for approximately 1 second. "That's very deep, Dad. The reservation is at 7. We need to leave by 6:30, I know, and Grandma is already at the restaurant. Warren glanced down at her. It's not even noon, I know. The serene delivery of someone conveying information they did not originate. She wanted to make sure they didn't give the reservation away. She's been there since 10:30. She ordered tea, then another tea. The waiter asked if she was ready to order lunch, and she told him she was waiting for her family. And he said the lunch service doesn't start for another 20 minutes, and she said that was perfectly fine. Warren stopped walking on the sidewalk outside the terminal. Dallas noon heat landing on him after the cold of the plane. She's been sitting in a restaurant since 10:30 in the morning. She brought her reading glasses and a magazine. Warren looked at the Dallas sky, blue and enormous and entirely unbothered by any of this, and he laughed. Real laughter. The kind that comes from somewhere low and genuine and has nothing performed about it. The kind that is the specific opposite of everything the morning had required him to be. Simone looked at him with the expression teenagers reserve for parents who have briefly departed from expected behavior. "What is wrong with you?" "Nothing," he said. "Absolutely nothing." He picked up his carry-on. They walked toward the parking structure. His phone buzzed once more before they reached the car, a message. A number he recognized now. Megan Hartwell's direct line, which she had written on the back of the business card along with her personal email, Mr. Kendrick. The incident report is filed. Complete. Everything in sequence, in my own words. It's in the system, and it cannot be edited retroactively. The timestamp is locked, and the original version is preserved. I wanted you to know it was done. She had added one more line. You said the next time would be different. I'm making it different, starting tonight. Warren read it standing between a concrete pillar and a parked car while Simone unlocked the car and asked if she practiced driving in the structure. Because technically it was a private lot, and she'd been waiting for this for months, and if he said no, she was going to bring it up at dinner in front of Grandma. He typed back, "Thank you, Megan." Filing that report after the fact, when no one is making you, when there's nothing immediate to gain from it, that's the harder kind of courage. The kind that actually changes things. He put the phone in his pocket, looked at his daughter, who was waiting with one hand on the car door, the expression of a person who has made a reasonable proposal and is awaiting decision. He handed her the keys. She looked at them, then at him. The composure slipped for about half a second, and she looked exactly like the child she still partly was. The one who was going to grow up and need to know how to read rooms and decide when to record and when to speak up and when to see a seat that was hers. "Don't go above 10 miles an hour," he said, "Dad. And don't tell your grandmother." She got in the driver's seat. He got in the passenger seat. She drove through the parking structure at 9 miles an hour with the concentrated care of someone who takes instructions seriously and is deeply invested in being allowed to do this again. She made it to the exit without incident. She handed him back the keys at the street. "Not bad," he said. She allowed herself a small, private smile. "I know." They drove toward the restaurant where his mother had been sitting since 10:30 in the morning with her tea and her magazine and her absolute certainty that no reservation was going to be given to anyone else while she was sitting in it. Warren looked out the passenger window at Dallas in the early afternoon, the light falling across the city without preference. The ordinary world going on in its ordinary way. And in the Maria system, a file was being created. Documentation, timestamps, boarding passes, crew communications, the seat assignment log for Flight 628 with Carolyn Webb's review flag attached, which meant the file would reach a human reviewer rather than routine archiving. And in the Kendrick Dynamics Development Lab in Memphis, a module that had been built and tested and waiting for deployment authorization was being cleared. Named in the internal system pattern recognition, because that was what it did. It found the moment before the moment became a pattern. The Megan Hartwell moment, the half-second of knowing and the choice that followed, the fear that looked like neutrality, the decisions that accumulated, flight after flight, into a system that produced the same outcome reliably, without a single person in the system believing they were responsible for it. The module found it, named it, sent it to a person with the authority and the responsibility to address it before it became something larger. That was the work. Warren Kendrick had not raised his voice once on Flight 628, had not threatened anyone, had not asked for anything except the seat he had already paid for. And that seat had become something else entirely. Not because of who he was, not because of the company he had built, or CISO who answered on the first ring. Because of what he had refused to do, he had refused to disappear. He had refused to go somewhere else. He had refused to make himself so someone else could feel comfortable occupying a space that was not hers. His father had driven Route 22 for 40 years, every morning, with the dignity that didn't ask permission from anyone because it didn't need permission to be real. He sat in his seat, and the sitting mattered. They reached the restaurant. His mother's car was in the lot. Through the glass, they could see her at a table near the window, her reading glasses on, her magazines opened, her tea in front of her, completely at ease with the situation she had created. She looked up when they came in. Her face did the thing it always did when she saw him walk through a door. The thing unchanged by how old he got, or what the company was worth, or what had happened on any given Tuesday morning. The thing that said, "There he is." He crossed the restaurant, bent down and held her for a moment. You're on time," she said. "I'm on time. Your father would be pleased." Warren straightened. Sat down. Yes, he said, he would. Sloane sat beside her grandmother and began telling her about the parking structure and the 9 miles an hour, and the fact that she had not hit anything, with the comprehensive detail of someone presenting evidence for a case she intends to win. His mother listened to every word. Warren looked out the window at the Dallas afternoon, at the light doing what light did. Without preference, without asking, he thought about a seat. Just a seat. An oval window and morning light and the world from a different angle. He thought about staying in it. He picked up the menu, and he was home.